It is the largest murder investigation in the history of the state of Ohio. The shocking murder of 8 family members in a small community made national headlines.
Good evening. They were all shot in the head, execution style. 8 members of the same extended family living in a rural part of southern Ohio. We're hearing for the first time what it was like on 911 recordings of relatives who called for help. Tonight, a manhunt goes on. A reward has been offered, and officials warn people to be cautious with a killer or killers still on the loose. A big question tonight, what led to such a rampage?
The first gruesome discovery of the Rhoden family members occurred on April 22, 2016. Bobby Jo Manley found her ex-brother-in-law, Chris Rhoden Sr., and his cousin Gary dead in Chris's trailer.
There's blood all over the house. My brother-in-law's in the bedroom, and I beat the hell out of him.
In another nearby mobile home on Union Hill Road, Chris's ex-wife Dana and their children, Hannah Mae and Chris Jr., were found shot in the head as they slept. Hannah's newborn baby was found unharmed lying next to her. Chris and Dana's son Frankie and his fiancée Hannah Gilly were also found shot in their beds with their 6-month-old baby boy lying with them covered in blood. The baby and Frankie's toddler son were unharmed. Then, a few hours later, an 8th victim was discovered. Kenneth Rhoden was found shot through the eye in his mobile home about 15 miles away. A few days after the bodies were discovered, investigators uncovered what they believed to be the first clue in the case.
I think it's okay for us to confirm that we did find marijuana in 3 locations. These are grow operations.
The community begins to speculate that a drug cartel could have played a role in the incident due to the precise nature of the murders.
The sheriff and everybody knows that there was a grow operation of mega amounts of plants. I mean, this is a drug pipeline.
It has aspects to it of a professional hit.
Fear of the unknown and just the awfulness of this crime, it was not lost on anybody.
I want to urge everyone to be under the understanding that there is a strong possibility that any individuals involved with this are armed and extremely dangerous.
Sheriff Chuck Reeder was right there by Governor Mike DeWine's side because the public clearly needed to know how much they needed to protect themselves since all these people had been murdered.
I can tell you, if you are fearful, arm yourself.
If the top law enforcement officer in the county is saying this, does he know more? Does he think that people may be in imminent danger? I mean, there's no help coming in 5 minutes. If you live in a city, that might be the case. Generally, that's not the case when you're out in these places that are more remote.
The killers are still at large, and the fear spreading over the community casts a shadow over the funeral proceedings. By the spring of 2017, authorities received more than 800 tips and conducted more than 400 interviews. But the lack of progress in the case frustrates local residents, especially with the passing of the 1-year anniversary.
All the time. It's been the worst.
It's still talked about quite a bit in the local community, and it's makes you weary, could you be next?
You came in like thieves in the night and took 8 lives, some being children, in the most horrific way I've ever seen in my 20-plus years. We are getting closer. We will find you.
There were 3 small children that survived the ordeal. They were found next to their lifeless parents, including a 6-month-old, a 3-year-old, and a newborn. The only child belonging to any of the victims that were not present at the time of the murders is Hannah Rhoden's daughter. The 2-year-old was with her father, Edward Jake Wagner. With new tips and information coming in every day, the investigators were starting to put the pieces together, and there were a number of people that caught their eye.
The AG's office is not saying how these 4 people may be possibly connected to the case, but many are hoping information will lead to justice. The Attorney General and Pike County Sheriff are calling for any and all information about these people. 46-year-old George Billy Wagner III, 46-year-old Angela Wagner, 25-year-old George Wagner IV, and 24-year-old Edward Jake Wagner. Officials say Jake Wagner is the father of victim Hannah Rhoden's daughter.
In 2017, state investigators publicized photos of the Wagner family and said, hey, if you know anything about these folks, let us know. The Wagners moved to Alaska, of all places. Obviously a bit odd to go from southeastern Ohio to a long ways away. And at the time, it was Jake had indicated he wanted to sort of shield the daughter he had with Hannah Rhoden from the awfulness of what had happened. I recall talking to the father of Dana and it was like, this, I don't know what's going on. This doesn't make any sense. Investigators obviously were looking at everything that they had been involved with and what their histories were and their interactions were to see if maybe somebody close to the family had done this. And I do think that in that particular instance, there was a lot of grief and like, look, we didn't do this.
I feel that every news conference that we do, that the killers are watching and they're listening and they're trying to find just as you guys are where we're at and what we're doing. And that's partly why we share no information.
At some point, you sort of say, well, if nobody's going to say anything, then we just got to get about our lives, and no more violence had happened. So I think that it was a situation of people assuming that this was sort of a targeted thing. So yeah, it did sort of die down.
Then in November of 2018, there was a major break in the case.
Breaking news.
We begin with a huge break in the brutal murders of 8 members of the Rhoden family in Pike County.
Today we have the answer. Members of one family conspired, planned, carried out, and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of another family. They did this quickly, coldly, calmly, and very carefully. But not carefully enough.
Arrests were happening in the Rhoden family murders, the Pike County Massacre. So I remember that day pretty vividly. Suddenly it was like, drop that, you got to go to Lexington. So our station started to send crews all over the place. It's like, go to Scioto, go to Ross County.
4 members of the Wagner family are arrested in separate locations in connection with the murders. All of them are facing the death penalty.
Billy, Angela, their sons, George and Jake, all charged with 8 counts of murder. And there were multiple other counts. I believe around 22 charges in all.
Along with murder charges, the 4 were facing conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and intercepting communications.
Before accused murderer Jake Wagner entered the courtroom today, loved ones of those he and his family are charged with killing embraced in a show of solidarity. Today's arraignment ended with attorneys entering a plea of not guilty, which Wagner affirmed.
Jake Wagner's parents and older brother also plead not guilty. Law enforcement also alleges that the family had backup plans in case they were caught.
They were to take revenge against anyone who went against them, including but not limited to Special Agent Scheider, Sheriff Reeder, and Attorney General Mike DeWine. There was also discussions of how they would try to make an escape.
I've seen their work. I know what they're capable of. We've been very cautious, making sure that security plans have been in place in my home and others.
As the trial went on, many more details were revealed.
As time went on and you started to learn in some of these court filings, there was just cameras that have been tampered with, allegedly, these types of things, silencers, it started to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together.
We believe the evidence will show that suspects spent months planning the crimes. They studied the victims' habits and their routines. They knew the layouts of their homes. They knew where they slept. And then after executing each victim, we believe the evidence will further show that the suspects tampered with the evidence, such as the victims' phones and the surveillance cameras on their properties.
Billy Wagner's mother, Frederica Wagner, is also accused of covering up the crimes, along with Angela Wagner's mother, Rita Newcomb, who is a notary. The Rhoden family claimed that Jake Wagner tried to coerce Hannah Rhoden to give up custody of their daughter a few weeks before the murders, but she refused. Court documents also show that the Wagner family hacked into the Facebook accounts of several Rhoden family members and intercepted a message from Hannah that stated if the Rhodens wanted custody of her daughter, they would have to kill her first. And a few months later, that's exactly what they did.
At that point, investigators had said, hey, listen, this is about the custody of a child. Much to the disbelief of many people, it was a domino that fell that sort of put things into a clearer focus And certainly we talked to Frederica, and she absolutely maintained the family's innocent.
I don't know who killed those people. I didn't know them.
Authorities seized 2 bulletproof vests that were purchased by Frederica that didn't make her look innocent.
I bought them after the crime, after the tragedy, 2 weeks later, and we proved that.
But when Frederica's case was being heard and there were conversations and closed-door meetings with attorneys, they decided to effectively let that case go.
Then, in December of 2019, one member of the Rhoden family takes a plea deal.
No, I just feel that it's not a good Christian thing to lie, and I couldn't live with it no more.
Rita Newcomb pled guilty to 1 misdemeanor charge of obstructing official business and also informs authorities that she never signed the custody documents. Prosecutors dropped the 5 felony charges as part of her plea deal.
She had been asked to say that it was her by her daughter, who feared that to tell otherwise would put her in jeopardy.
Then, a little over a year later, another domino falls.
I am guilty, no.
On April 22nd, 2021, the 5th anniversary of the killings, Jake Wagner pleads guilty to 8 counts of aggravated murder.
160 years of prison terms that are not within the consecutive terms of life in prison without parole.
Jake Wagner admitted that he killed 5 members of the Rhoden family and he shot a 6th, leaving open the question, obviously, of who killed the remaining 3. And in doing so, the deal he worked out with prosecutors was that he would agree to testify against his dad and mom and his older brother as long as the death penalty was removed from their cases. But it was a huge turning point. This happened. Maybe somebody else is going to do the same.
5 months later, Angela Wagner also takes a plea deal, but says that she did not participate in any of the murders herself.
The 8 murder charges against Angela were removed when she pleaded guilty in September.
She'll be behind bars for 30 years, but avoids the death penalty.
Based solely and strictly upon the defendant's fulfilling her agreement to testify truthfully in each and every of the other co-defendants' trials.
George IV, the oldest brother, his attorneys are also claiming that he didn't shoot anybody, and that's what's been stated in these confessions. And now, of course, it's taking a long time for the court proceedings to unfold. So you can only imagine what the loved ones of the Rhoden family have been going through.
The trial of George Wagner IV began on August 29th, 2022. George claims that he is not guilty because he never shot anyone and only went along that night because he feared that their father might kill Jake.
George did not shoot or kill anybody that's a named victim in this case. He did not pull a trigger once. Jake, on the other hand, has admitted to killing at least 5 people personally and shooting a 6th.
Despite his protests, he was found guilty of all 22 counts against him and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Well, feelings of relief and respect for the rule of law are abundant in and around Waverly, given what was at stake in this murder trial that put this entire community under the microscope. Moments before George Wagner was found guilty on the first of 22 criminal charges he faced, trial watchers like Chip Walter waited anxiously. What did you think might or might not happen?
Well, there was a lot of apprehension, and I thought from the get-go, from the early stages, that there would be a guilty.
The 9 women and 3 men on the jury, who listened to more than 40 days of testimony, decided Wagner was guilty on all counts for the role he played in the Pike County Massacre. What do you make of all this madness?
You said the word.
Madness. Tony Rhoden commented after the verdicts were read aloud in court. Rhoden lost his brothers, Chris Rhoden Sr. and Kenneth Rhoden, and 6 other loved ones when investigators say George, his brother Jake Wagner, and their parents, Billy and Angela Wagner, executed a murderous plan on a single night in April 2016.
As of December 22nd, 2022, Billy Wagner has yet to stand trial.
It's just so incomprehensible. And you just think from a humanistic standpoint, the tragedy of it all, the loved ones who are the survivors, the family that was devastated and still devastated, How can anyone ever understand what took place? It will never leave me, for sure.